In the fallow darkness. While the congregation of townspeople, mostly labourers, walked out of the grand open doorway, Anselm walked in. Not wanting to partake of the churchly gathering, he slunk into the grand hall while it was being emptied. The calmer and quieter it became with the fading of the echoing voices, so too did his mood mimic the shift. There were of course some who still sat in their places, and clerics who regularly walked to and fro, both on the ground floor and up above on the wall-side walkways. He sat himself down closest to the wall on the immediate row of benches. The grand cathedral's main hall, in which the local space presided, could be viewed as slightly disappointing with the overall size of the cathedral in mind. He was well aware that much of the church was for godly work and not to be meddled with by the commonage. The sight of the altar was of course a spectacle. A golden throne with a coffin below it, signifying the martyr god. Surrounding it was people that surely were meant to depict a state of ecstatic reverence, but Anselm thought they more resembled despair. Towering above it all was the statue of the Saint Mother, founder of Yarnam and mother to a dead god, pouring a vessel in answer to mankind's prayers. He liked that story, but simultaneously thought it incredibly sad, how a mother had to outlive her child. But what joy it must have been to cure the people with holy blood. He eventually settled down and tried to calm his thoughts. He felt utterly foolish, but nevertheless had to try. The advice to cleanse your thoughts was becoming more difficult when put into practice. There simply was always something he could think of. In fact, his whole reason was due to the fact that he could not escape his mind and thoughts as of late. He leaned his back against the seat, producing an echoing thud. He sat like so for a while, trying to imagine a grand darkness that swallowed up every other image that would appear before his closed eyes. When it failed after some time, he frustratedly leaned against the back seat in front of him, resting face down on his crossed forearms, trying once more to think of nothing. He eventually looked up in another failure, glanced around and saw a white-garbed gentleman standing by the opposite edge of the row he sat upon. He had a trimmed brown, slightly greying shin beard, and nothing else of hair on his face. His garb was simple, more that of a clerk, a black vest over a white shirt, wrapped in a mantle with a holy shawl hanging behind the back. He had a smile on his face, and once their eyes locked, he started to walk down the seating row towards him and sat down.
First time?
Well, no, not really.
No, but the first time praying alone.
He continued to smile but looked forward to the shrine. About right.
Apologies, but it did not appear to go as planned.
He did not answer, but looked in the same direction.
Is there a reason?
No. I don't know what I thought.
What was it?
He looked at him, and the man turned his head to him.
The thing you thought that you thought.
Oh, well, it's about my work.
Well, if the god's answer is not immediate, then perhaps I can provide one.
He drew his breath. I'm an officer, you see. You cannot be bothered by the things you see. You learn to leave it be quickly once you start. There is no end to the things man can do, and it is not really my job to explain why. The cleric looked patiently and listened with focus. Just a couple of days ago, there was an incident. A woman. She was just scolding her child, but quite aggressively so. Me and the boys just walked over to check up after she had gone about for a longer time. Then she started hollering at us as soon as we came up.
Did it frighten you?
He was about to say no, but said nothing instead. Well, it became more complicated, and when we tried to get a word in, her head twitched. I mean, she lunged at my body, scratching and tearing with her nails. I swear they were like claws. But her head remained tilted, like stuck in place while she screamed a broken scream. The more I heard it, the less it sounded like a woman's, a human's even. That is what scared me. He eventually looked back at the cleric, who no longer smiled.
What happened to the woman?
It was the strangest thing. No one has been able to tell how, but 3 other men came by. Strong lads by the looks of it. Perhaps simple workers. They aided us in restraining her, but then she froze up and became silent. One of my buddies suddenly had blood all over his uniform, and everyone stepped back as she slumped to the ground. Only 2 of the lads stood in shock. The third must have run for it.
Was she murdered?
She must have been. None of the others knew the one that disappeared.
Is that why you came here? The troubled thoughts about that man?
Anselm looked forward again. No, actually. I caught sight of a child. He looked so... I don't really know... confused. I walked up and turned him around as quickly as I could. Been a long time since I was his age. But something was familiar with him. I asked him a couple of things, and where he lived. He was just silent. I asked who his pa was, and he looked to me and said, "He's a hunter." The cleric now appeared troubled.
What became of the child?
Anselm tilted his head. suddenly feeling as if a load had been lifted from his mind. He stayed at the station until his pa came for him. Luckily, I did not have to tell him the sad news. Looked to be a good man. But still, I thought much of that boy since then. A town like no other, where its people knew not a poor man's life. It was a spiky horizon that the town created with many a tower, spiked roof and intricate stoneworks. No doubt, the town itself desperately attempted to resemble their precious cathedral. From afar, the whole thing did indeed look like a whole conjoined structure rather than a city. But to spy the real cathedral was no chore. The giant, flat-roofed clock tower rising high over the rest gave it away, with yet another gargantuan spire building rising further above behind it. Yharnam. A pleasing sight, but he dreaded even now to enter. Longing back to the rolling hills and steppes of the hinterland, he hesitantly advanced with his few belongings slung over his back, towards the vile town. One's dreams were not to be taken lightly. He had heard it all his life, unlike the folk of the town. While they concerned themselves with building higher and higher, they had little time to think and to dream. But his fair lady wanted him here. He at least treated his dreams with the respect they deserved. Farmers' heads turned as he passed through the countryside. He was surprised how different they were, him and them. They dressed so impractically, even for toiling in the fields, another vain example for their wealth. Their eyes had trouble detaching themselves from his cape made out of crow feathers and black cloth. He paid them no mind. He anticipated he would be unwelcome. He had heard as much of Yharnam. The alteration from the homely farmlands to bustling streets was shockingly abrupt, especially when said streets belonged to Yharnam. Everything from the cobbled streets, sidewalks, streetlights, and especially the buildings was done with meticulous skill. Never had he seen such marvel made by man. He caught himself several times slowing his pace to stare in awe at the particular glasswork, the fancy workings of a decorative spire, metal-crafted fences, and adorning statues of figures elusive to him. In his home they seldom made paths or abodes of stone. Here it seemed as if the people literally lived on top of each other, considering the height of some houses, more akin to castles he had heard stories of. Now to find his destiny, in whatever form it may have. It struck him only now that this task might not be as easy as previously perceived. Perhaps it was he who naively had thought He only needed to make it to his destination for the world to take care of the rest. Or perhaps it was the overwhelming town that jostled his mind. His own little village, nestled in the large green hills, offered a different kind of life. Currency such as gold and pennies was foregone by old-fashioned trading. The butcher would prepare the game he had hunted for him in exchange for a portion of it. The fletcher would prepare his leather, and they would share the hide. Here he saw two rugged men transporting a horse-driven cart loaded with game, likely to be sold to whomever for coin. Coins that he largely lacked. After having wandered the streets, he tired of the looks and whispers he was given, and he started considering alternatives. Searching himself away from the people, he turned down every street that had the least amount of feet wandering it. Soon enough he found himself in a much shadier part. Lights from the windows were absent, as were the pedestrians, suggesting that the town's surge of wealth had caught itself off guard. An entire street abandoned, and for what? To him, the buildings looked exactly similar to those he had just escaped from, and fit for use, but were nevertheless rendered derelict. Sounds of squatters rummaging around from inside was no surprise to him. With the kind of power he anticipated the Yarnamites praised to, they all wanted more. When one moved into a newly built home, one of their friends had acquired a more prominent one that in turn provoked jealousy, and so they had to move once more. Ridiculous. A lifestyle built around one's possessions. But here, in a sense, he felt like a rich man. He picked a boarded-up house that attracted his attention for bearing resemblance to the temple in his hometown. The arching pattern on the facade took on a triangular shape that had little spiky adornments on the edges, unlike the others who spoke of a fashion consisting of curved arcs. He admired the exterior and spotted the windows of the upper floor having not been considered for boarding. He took a few paces back, then ran 3 steps up along the wall to grab the statue of a little protruding figure, a hooded, praying character that made an excellent climbing resource. With all the adornments and patterns, the climb was easy, and he made his way up the 3 floors to the attic level in 9 seconds. A fancy of his to keep track of how quickly he passed through various terrain. These Yarnam houses allowed him to break his record he achieved on the cliffs back home. For a vacant house, it was in good shape. The whole attic floor was spacious and without walls. Many wooden poles stood along the long room. The high ceiling was angled steeply upwards, so the highest reaches were obscured with darkness. Comfy, secluded, and not too big. Perfect. He stood idle for a moment, only listening and feeling, so as to catch the attention of any other eventual presence. He heard none, and threw off his bag from his shoulder, and started walking to peek downstairs. The door down to the 3rd floor was unlocked, and he could freely enter the house below. Not much of note, only a few big pieces of furniture with cloth covering them. Not as many spiderwebs as he had expected. He found some candles after searching the drawers of an abandoned dresser. What luck. He brought all the cloths with him and formed a little bedding for himself. There he lay down to finally rest comfortably after a long journey. When his eyes opened shortly after, it was dark all around him. The night had come with its darkness, added to by the derelict state and absent light of the district as a whole. He let his eyes adjust to the new atmosphere. The hunger was soon upon him, and he reached inside his bag for the bread, cheese and salted fish. On his journey, there were many days when only bread and cheese was his sole sustenance, but now we could partake of the fish. Now that his real work could begin, he needed real nourishment. After sending down the food with much haste and little thought, he lit a candle and readied a simple pen with his journal.
Arrived. No dreams in the short sleep. Sleeping in one of the many abandoned buildings that they toss to the sides. Buildings like these, would we not know what to do with back home? Too big, but it feels nice. Tonight my hunt begins. Hopefully I will know more of what the fair lady has in mind. At times like these, I sometimes wish the dreams to be just a bit more specific. Would spare me much time. But I despair not over the challenge, but welcome it. Thus I only complain here. I hate complainers. 20th of the first moon, year 1876.
He looked up from his notes, put them down and approached the window he entered through. The portion of town in his vicinity did indeed seem largely void of habitants, dark as it was with more vibrant light shining beyond. He hid his belongings up in the rafters, redeemed it too high for anyone other than himself to jump, blew out the candle, braced himself, and ran towards the window. He jumped and straightened out his body, arms reaching out before him. He flew over the street below him and grabbed hold of the stone balcony rails on the opposite house. He proceeded up on the roof, which was slightly advanced to find footing on. He ran swiftly upwards, using his hands for better grip, surely looking like a desperate dog out of water, darting forward. Lucky no one saw. Up above, poised with his arms against the peak of the long crown of the roof, he could see where the abandoned streets ended, with the light's glow shining in the inhabited ones. He jumped away, running dexterously along the rooftops. He found it much easier now with all the adornments and decorative tiles, excellent for stepping platforms. The streets were surprisingly deprived from people. The hour seemed not terribly late. The occasional drunkard, latecomer or inconspicuous traveler. 2 men caught his attention though. Unlike the rest, they seemed to be armed. Were they patrolling? Perhaps the city's officials? They appeared much too ordinary for men of the law, however. He wished for an encounter and descended to the streets, landing in a darkened corner where he anticipated them to wander by. Then he straightened up and walked casually out in their direction. He could hear them taking heavy breaths, like they had recently been in a scruff and was now winded from it. But they looked scarcely battered. They had covered their faces by fashioning their collar much longer than normal to reach up above their noses. Somewhat armored with leather pads and queer-looking reinforcements on their left legs. They both became tense when they saw him, as if restraining themselves.
"Oh there! You'd better get inside."
The man continued to breathe like a starved animal.
"These parts are not safe. Wouldn't want anything to happen, eh? Would ya?"
His words intrigued him. He inspected their weapons while his hood concealed his eyes well enough. They looked more like a contraption in a sawmill than a weapon, yet a blade and sharp edge were present to deem it lethal.
"You needn't worry for me. I've dealt with my share of troubles to handle some more." "What's that supposed to mean? You threatening us?"
He snorted out the words like a big clump of anger would spew out while he uttered them. His companion reached out an arm to block his path and shook his head at him.
"Let him be foolhardy if he so wishes."
The man's aggression escaped him, but retained the intimidating walk as he passed, eagerly staring tensely at him. Intrigued by the queer encounter, he watched them disappear down the street, then followed. Two troublemakers wanting some fun, on that he was sure. But the exact nature of said fun could provide insight into this place of his supposed calling. The pair took a turn, and he stalked them from the dark corners. It became apparent that there was no need for him to emphasize stealth, as they appeared oblivious to anything other than themselves and their strange search. They indeed walked about the place, looking and peering at everything, but hastily so, perhaps from being in a hurry. They shined with their lanterns around the buildings and down the alleyways. In shadowing them, it struck him how labyrinthine the town was constructed. Streets varied in size and plenty of sideways led to hidden squares or to dead ends. But the two appeared to have some semblance of local awareness, as there was an intelligent tempo to their forwardness. Suddenly they gave pause. They grasped their weapons, revealing to him that there in fact was a tactical stance to be had with the strange armaments. They both held out a form of saw-like contraption with a handle running parallel with the thick blade. They looked into a darkened street, waiting. Then they fastened their lanterns to their belts and advanced with care into the dark alley. He sneaked up to peek around the corner. As it was rather luminous from the grander street, the alley they had turned down was in itself considerably darker, and it was hard to see further inside. But even with its nature mostly obscure, a set of large glowing yellow eyes was clearly distinguished to peer back at the two men. A growl was heard, and the men readied their weapons, standing still in the middle of the narrow path. Out from the darkness lunged suddenly something big and monstrous, akin to a hunting wolf. He was instantly surprised to see the men's speed. One crouched down and simply leapt under the monster's jump to stand up behind him, while the other quickly stepped back, evading claw-adorned hands of abundant fur. He was of course puzzled at the nature of the fiend, who he initially thought to simply be a man. With a slight increase of proximity and light of the lanterns, it did indeed resemble a man in most aspects, but a man that had suddenly decided to grow hair all over and acquired a fancy for claws and fangs instead of gloves and polished teeth. The men proceeded to swing their contraptions at the beast, wildly and with such a haste and flurry, one verged on confusion at the sight. Blood flew in the air, and the poor beast had little choice but to accept the blows. With no escape, it fell quickly dead to the ground, but that did not stop them from cutting. The more they cut, and the more blood that was spilled, the louder they groaned. They laughed and reveled like a feast. They disgusted him more than the beast ever could. He stepped silently out from his corner and walked towards them. He had grown curious to see what they would do once they saw him. For a time, they were too preoccupied with their pleasure. When one inevitably saw him, he was startled to the point of falling over, almost.
Blimey! You again! Did we not warn you? Now look at what you've stumbled over.
He sounded much too angry for someone that bravely fell a boasting prey, albeit proceeding to mutilate said prey commonly goes against hunting etiquette. Their emotions prohibited him from inquiring into the origins of the more conspicuous problem.
You know,
the other looked back at his comrade.
This one will likely be a beast within the hour. Look at him, stalking good and hard working hunters in the dead of night. Things fitting for a beast, I say.
A beast? Like that one?
He pointed back at a heap of a bloody mess. They did not answer, nor did they look back, only staring hungrily at him.
How come you say that?
You a foreigner, eh? I can tell by that accent. It is probably you that bring the disease into Yharnam. Your weak bodies cannot handle the holy blood.
Blood, and holy to boot. The poor fools must have been stricken by the nightmare to be talking like that. Such folk can seldom be reasoned with, their minds being somewhere else. One of them folded out his blade from the handle. A neat trick, but their minds were, after all, somewhere else. His was not.
You are making a mistake,
he warned shortly.
It's your blood, you know. Too much of it. We need to take some of it, lest you become a beast.
In their delusion, they had chosen violence, and he had no scruples that kept him from complying. Decisions made with an absent mind ought not to go unpunished. They took a few imposing steps at him, with a clear yearning for blood in their eyes. With but 5 paces between them, he moved. He ran up the brick wall and found footing over the frame of a doorway. His movement was so fast that they, with their strange intoxication, lost him for a moment. He jumped down, now on the other side of the cadaver and the two, quickly stepping backwards into the darkness that was revealed to be a round little area with 4 different entryways and a patch of grass in the middle. He immediately stepped around the corner of the house and heard only their footsteps cautiously following. He had in fact anticipated them rushing after without second thought, but some lingering tactics were still present within them, it seemed. From around the corner, he saw the light cast by the lanterns growing closer, and he stepped silently further down along the curved wall. All the while, they had never stopped grunting. Rather, their sounds had increased in volume, now sounding like beasts themselves. Concealed by his feathered cape, he brandished his curved and faithful dagger. Silently he leapt up and stood along a spacious windowsill. Jittery, they turned the corner and shone around where he once stood. They let out a loud mutter in their blood-drunken frustration. Surprised, they turned their back to glare down the other corner, only briefly. He descended with his cape flowing like a shadow coming to life behind him. He grabbed the one to the left around his neck and jabbed the dagger into his side. Then he spun away to the left while the man howled in anger more so than pain. This allowed him to launch a heavy kick at a dumbfounded man that only now had managed to turn his way. He aimed for the belt and successfully took out his lantern. Then he slit the throat of the other and pushed him face down onto the stone. Now completely dark, he turned calmly around towards the other man. He saw perfectly fine in the new, blanketed murkiness and watched the poor man extending his weapon out in front of him, towards where he thought his adversary was. Now he breathed with mouth agape and produced such loud and aggravated grunts they echoed slightly in the space. He carefully walked forward, but stumbled immediately over his dead companion's corpse. While his balance wavered, he stepped around him quickly, jabbing his foot at the legs to bring him down to his knees, and spoke gently into his ear.
Sorry. Dream now.
Then he plunged the dagger into the side of his throat. He gurgled and became stiff, then limp and silent. He started the burial rite by laying the two on their backs, then gently plunging the dagger into the heart of the first man. He managed, however, not to continue as footsteps and another light approached. He was gripped by panic, caught while being deep inside his mind, and ran forward to climb the wall. Yarnam's architecture yet again had him uttering a thank you under his breath, as the little miniature tower decorations had him up on the roofs in the blink of an eye. He lingered out of sight, too curious to see who would discover his little mess. A caped man in a top hat, lantern to his belt like the others, and 2 shining daggers in each hand. He looked properly dumbfounded at what was before him. He then, to his own surprise, folded the blades into each other and put them away. He knelt down to inspect the corpses. What were his intentions? Was this man a friend of theirs? Whoever he was, it was hard to imagine he would look fondly on the incident, yet he intrigued him greatly. He left him for now, presuming the occasion was ill-fitted for a foreigner's question. In the morning, when he returned, curious about what happened after he left, there was no commotion in the early hours as he had guessed. The bodies were simply gone, so was the blood. Harald had been waiting for some time in the small antechamber to the main research facility on the upper floor. The sickening noises from beyond was testing his patience, resulting in more and more accumulating contempt towards Professor Citus. Beyond the walls he heard only the mutterings of deformed patients that occasionally would cause him to twitch with unease once they surged in deranged screams. Highly unprofessional to have his floor devolved into this guise of a madhouse. And perhaps appearances were accurate, since the man had now kept him waiting for a considerable amount of time, long enough for 3 separate people having left, promising to summon him. When a particular loud scream caused such a severe reaction, he stood up from the bench. He decided to simply fetch the man himself, without regards for environmental hazards. He was not surprised as he entered through the double door into the main corridor. His suspicions that had him previously preferring to meet with Citus outside was now dreadfully confirmed. Unlike his own floor, disorder surrounded him to the degree he almost let out a loud scoff. The noises became louder, and he refrained from opening the doors on both sides to inquire about Citus' whereabouts, as he preferred not to see the sources of the sounds of men and women gibbering and mumbling, ranging from pain to delight as to what they were hearing inside their freakish heads. He turned into an open doorway, where he found Citus within a large room with a shallow pool of water in the middle. 2 swollen-head individuals sat on all fours with their heads dipped into the water, all displaying the weird features of narrow and elongated limbs in addition to the round, shifting and bulging head. A third patient had his arms tightly restrained to the sides of his torso as he crawled around like some deranged child pretending to be a worm. But perhaps the method was sound, as there seemed to be no feet emerging from the long patient's garb. Watching over them was Citus himself, primarily with his focus on the crawling patient. "Mr. Citus," he announced sternly, only provoking a slight twitch of his head. "Busy around here, I take it?"
Yes,
Very much so. Ever since our little mishap, things have developed smoothly, as you can see. He indicated towards the man on the floor. Harald immediately thought of several counter comments to the statement. Some he thought rather witty, others completely rude. Unfortunately, the vicar does not share your enthusiasm. He is rather troubled by those living failures. And, oh, but that is the most fascinating aspect about them, that they are living. It shows the potency of the phantasms, and although their contact is weak, it surely reveals one is indeed present. We just need to tune it up a bit. Right. He felt interrupted when the crawling patient stopped and began making a noise with an unseen mouth, imitating the crashing of waves. Anyhow, the vicar is allocating the space and resources of the West Wing to me. Saito snapped his head towards him, looking him dead in the eyes. What? The time has come. He seeks an immediate remedy to the frenzied symptoms. Like any disease, the cause holds the reason and the cure. Study of blood administration is gaining more dedication to finally eradicate what is already claiming lives. That cannot be. No. What about their remedy? The phantasms, are guides. They possess the knowledge to circumvent the beast. Then I propose you submit that discovery to the Vicar's Council. Is this perhaps the cure? What we see before us now? He gestured with his hand towards the scene. Saito looked upon it and smirked scornfully, giving Harald the impression that Saito considered him immature. Pardon your observation. It is akin to pointing at a frenzied and calling it blood healing. Such unfortunate trait are for the wise, us, to prune away. Well put, I suppose. Nevertheless, the Vicar's decision has been made. But I implore you, continue this work so that it may sway him once more. There is certainly great potential. Yes, indeed, Harald. You know this is a safer alternative. We put them in contact with the gods themselves. Lady Maria would not have approved of her patients being exposed to that horrific frenzy, even if it meant producing a cure. Harald finally lost his patience, and upon him invoking the late lady's name, he felt himself entitled to do so. This, he declared loudly and gestured towards the patients. This is what she would disapprove of. A mad search to alter humankind just like the blood's side effects. It is the very epitome of fight fire with fire. No more, Citus. Phantasms may hold many truths, and the work will not be discontinued. But by all accounts, it cannot cure the frenzied. His raised tone of voice was received by a condescending look of bewilderment. But, Harald, It is not up to us. Whatever agenda we may have, it is irrelevant in the face of this guidance. Guidance? Bah! You have yet produced anything coherent of this guidance, and I am not convinced it is a benevolent voice if they so cruelly deprive their hosts of humanity in this fashion. Saito's face was completely blank. The corner of his mouth and his eyebrows twitched before he waved for a man sitting observantly along the wall to approach. He was ready with a head extractor, and Harald was about to protest, but was silenced by how violently Saito's grabbed hold of the crawling patient. The man approached and jabbed the apparatus into the back of the patient's head. Saito's! See now, Harald. Pay close attention here. He feverishly turned the drill that entered the bloated skin without the resistance of a skull. Clear liquid started to seep out from the hole. The patient writhed strangely, like a worm with at times subdued movements that erupted with thrashing fits, but was completely silent. When the drill was retrieved, Saito's cupped his hand at a hole to catch some of the dripping, sticky liquid. He held it out towards Harald, who did not make any good attempts to look any closer. Within the clear goo was yellowish spots, looking like enlarged amoeba. See the work of the phantasms, the initial makings of internal eyes. Callously he tossed away the contents of his hands, released the patient, who went about his business, and wiped his hand through the water of the shallow pool. Harald felt his lower jaw tremble, be it from anger or fear he could not discern. His internal turmoil would have required a great deal of composure in order to respond to Saito's, but he felt it easier to simply turn around and leave. Things used to be better with dear Lady Maria around. Looking into the deep and dark maw of the labyrinth, through which Ludwig and his company had vanished, Frederica finally determined she was done with the labyrinth. Although it was her first time in the section of the hill, the thrill had simply vanished, replaced with a subtle and constant terror that always began when Harald mentioned the place. It increased, no longer being at all subtle once she entered physically, and had only now acknowledged that the tomb of the gods might not be all that good for her sanity. The thought had mainly been provoked by the look upon Ludwig's face. Having worked for over a year now alongside him, and not seeing the familiar courageous smile on his face as he entered, had made an effect on her. Such was her thoughts while standing before the corridor opening, through which the faintest hint of a breeze blew back at her from the darkness. She turned back to the round and well-lit hall, by now well established by them, with several people going about their work in uncovering ancient artifacts. She thought that Harald would have to find someone else to head over such expeditions. The Tomb of the Gods had never reinforced the meaning of its namesake, but had only caused her great doubts. Additionally, even though the man took some deliberation to hide the fact, the excavations were no longer as they had been when she first came into her position. With so many prospectors being sent down into the depths, more clerics had been summoned back to the cathedral to conduct further research into the healing. But Frederica was not a people person, yet had dedicated so much to the clerical institution under Harald. Now the labyrinth was overcome by the scholars of Mensis. Perhaps it was the natural course of things. Great institutions divide themselves to muster greater force and resources into different fields. She walked back into the chamber, still with thoughts of Ludwig and her own indecisiveness, blocking out most of the sounds of mumbling men brushing against paper and the sounds of stone and metal being moved around carefully. Perhaps it was at Mensis her ambitions lay, for had it not been the pursuit long before her own time with the church, the search for truth? A middle-aged man with round spectacles that enlarged his eyes, a thick beard and a formal and fancy robe of Mensis entered, most likely having just arrived. He stood out, for he dressed almost as ceremoniously as the church's clerics, wrapped in a thick shawl that was dark brown with green linings in favor of the traditional black and white. Otherwise he was clad like the traditional scholar of Mensis, with dark brown, green and red. He stopped and scanned the room. As she herself stood right in the center, he locked his eyes with her and approached.
Maiden,
He introduced brusquely.
the sage?
She raised one of her eyebrows, and he took a deep breath.
The man from the church. I am to guide him along the path.
She realized who he was, and looked over at the timid man sitting along the wall, rubbing his hands nervously.
That's him.
She pointed him out, but just as Maedis was about to walk over, she stepped in front of him to politely delay the advance.
Could I?
He immediately appeared irritated and offended.
I wanted to ask, will he be alright?
Maedis rolled his eyes.
He has been graced. Of course he will be alright.
I know, but I mean, what will happen?
He shrugged.
One such as I cannot truly say. That's what I am here for, after all. He can only pray his encounter will be mild. But I have seen some tragedies. But worry not. The gods will surely care for him, no matter what.
His mean face had softened slightly. She nodded, but felt not very convinced.
I'll go fetch him. He has been hesitant.
He waved dismissively with a hand, then crossed his arms. She walked over to the short-haired young man, who pensively watched her come.
Are you ready?
she asked softly. He looked around indecisively, stroking his hands over his troubled face.
I don't know. I think I might be a little frightened.
Yes, I can imagine. But it is good. The gods will surely recognize such humility.
Everyone said I should feel joy. But I am not so certain.
Hesitantly, she reached out her hand and laid it on his back.
They are jealous. They will never know what it's like, and will never have your courage. None of us in this room are as brave as you. It is admiration. We admire you. That's why everyone says you should feel joy. But whatever you feel, the gods will acknowledge it is true.
She felt her voice waver, but he must not have noticed, for he looked up at her, breathed in sharply and stood up. He walked past her towards the haughty scholar of Mensis, and she wondered who he had been before all this. Who it was that now walked on the shirt's behest, down into the maw of the unknown, with the promise of seeing the gods. She herself dared not to do what he was now doing, yet she prayed and believed. Would not everyone want to speak with and hear the gods? Is it not a grand plan that mankind will one day join them in their greatness? She joined them at the chamber's center. Maiden had taken hold of the young man's hands and mumbled something sounding like prayer. The man was silent and had his eyes closed.
Are you prepared?
He asked, and looked up at the sage, who nodded.
What a blessing! A saintly sage in our time, just like the first scholar who spoke with the gods. I cannot compare my metal as scribe to yours, who will partake directly. Shall we begin?
The man nodded again, and Maiden smiled excitedly, letting go of his hands.
The chamber.
He looked over at Frederica. She pointed over at a small closed door.
The monument is right inside.
Having watched them leave, much like she had done with Ludwig, she returned to her thoughts and reconsidered. Mensis was not more the place for her as she had concluded the labyrinth to be. Having seen the unique fear in the young man's eyes, only to have it callously ignored by Maiden, she did not wish to partake in such a search for truth. Although it seemed to bring the scholar a joy she would likely never experience, she felt no heartfelt desire to share it. But perhaps that was the price. And what did she truly know of it? It could be her own weakness that caused her to doubt. But a man had just given up his sanity so that the church may uncover a truth that had been sought well before her own time. The Thumerians truly were a gifted and crafty people. Long now had there been interpretations of a most holy place within. It was to be known as a hill, and it was the church's most coveted jewel in the labyrinth necklace. Undoubtedly that the church had grand and lofty dreams of what knowledge and wealth would be found inside. To Ludwig, the most pleasant thought was that perhaps it was the end to an endless labyrinth. Yes, the Thumerians truly were a gifted and sinister people. Only recently had Ludwig contemplated the structure surrounding them and the disposition in which most creatures were found. Albeit a degree of human, they were devoid of soul and thought. Was that the intention of the gods? To have a civilization of puppets that did not have the consciousness to bother with digging themselves into degradation. He had seen what had become of the veterans that had not followed Master German, vanished, absconded within the labyrinth. And now, the same peculiarity happened to those he knew and warded. Diligent prospectors that over time became too disturbed by their endless duty. A place that never ended, a new room behind every door, and just when you thought there had been all to see, there comes a chalice to plunge you deeper still. It had occurred that prospectors went in with their group, like all was fine and dandy. Then they would perhaps scout out a trivial chamber alone, and that would be the last of them. Others plainly went in alone, craven of face and muttering to themselves. The call of the gods had it been dubbed, for all had left on their own volition, but not truly as themselves. These were the thoughts Ludwig could not expel while catching their breaths within the chambers of a hill. The memories refused to leave. Memories of his journey. He was undoubtedly cursed already. The fetid and devitalizing place that had been opened by a rite most morbid. What could be seen in the labyrinth sure made one conjure questions with no sensible answers.
Ah! Up you go, boys. No use idling, lest we never see the sun again.
He leapt to his feet and clapped with his hands vigorously. The thoughts had plagued him for too long now, and he would rather not give them free rein. He knew the thoughts would take him to nightmares, and as long as he could, he would not allow them such. The prospectors, sharing his dreaming woes, drowsily and not equally spirited, got to their feet.
Time to press on. This here is nothing to worry about. So far it has been relatively peaceful. Perhaps this one is unique because of its vacancy.
They had agreed on a short relief after making their way up a chamber with 4 levels positioned along the walls, so one could stand at the bottom and see all the way up. After the twists and turns they came upon the room they anticipated to find. A larger hall with arching pillars and a lever with blue glowing lanterns. That which was synonymous with deeper parts being revealed. Dutifully remaining at its post stood a tall and strong figure, clad in rags and bits and pieces of old armor. Wielding a long greatsword, it stood firm and quiet as they approached.
"Leave this one to me,"
Ludwig ordered as he unsheathed his silver sword.
Ludwig, come on.
Gremia argued.
We can all take him. No need for your chivalry.
But Ludwig knew all too well the things that could jump forth in the labyrinth. By now he had seen his fair share of people dying to fiends like this, and people willingly choosing seclusion in its depths.
"Few are below chivalry, my friend."
He smiled back and advanced the guard. The brute, with his entire head wrapped with a worn cloth, started to take imposing steps towards him, with his sword held down to his left. Orbs of fire suddenly came hurtling towards them. He lunged away to the side and fired his rifle on instinct, having only caught a glimpse of the movement behind the former figure.
"Have at them, men!"
He shouted and regained his stance, pointing his swords towards the fiends. Little candles, previously passed as still sources of light, were held by small prostrating figures, covered by the dark and maniacally wrapped cloth around their tiny frames. Ludwig aggressively approached the guard, as to antagonize him. The other three flanked towards the walls and sprinted past towards the inferno-spitting sorcerers. Fire and bullets soared in the air, but Ludwig kept his attention on the great sword that now sought his blood. The creature charged, dragging its sword along the ground with such force sparks painted its trail. It swung upward, and he maneuvered to the monster's bare side with a pirouette, horizontally slashing at the creature's arm. The might of the blow felt as if it cut deep enough to sever the arm, but seldom did the labyrinth creature crumble quickly. A man's scream in panic shook his resolve, and out of the corner of his eye he spotted one who had caught on fire. He deemed his own challenger sufficiently shaken by the blow to allow him time for reload. He knelt, slammed in the rounds, and tried to locate his companion's attacker, but never managed to fire. The tall guard turned fully around and held a large blade at his side, aiming a heavy thrust. He was forced to throw himself away into a roll. In exiting his dodge, he knelt up quickly and aimed down at one of the fire-casting lumps. Long and slender arms protruded from the ball of cloth with a ghastly face in its front, hands holding small candles that would send forth infernal magic. His round impacted, and the ball-shaped magician was thrown backwards, granting the fiery, frenzied prospector some reprieve. With a suppressed, sounding groan came the brutish guardian upon him, with the sword arcing over its head downwards. He rolled away, tossing his rifle for more mobility, then leapt into a flurry of swipes and stabs, adamant in making short work of their duel. The unfettered guardian, bleeding heavily, prepared a sideward swing towards him. As he committed to the action, Ludwig quickly stepped forward as close as he could to the fiend, sword in front of him. As the guardian swung, so did Ludwig step in and along the side-sweeping movement close to his body, blades edged to his throat. As their momentum collided, he pressed the sword like he was pushing himself away. The cut was swift, and in a macabre pirouette, they both stumbled out of a bloody dance, Ludwig with a red blade, and a guardian short of a head. The body dropped the sword and stumbled a step forward before crashing to the ground. The others, having slayed their foes and had turned their attention to abate the flames. The scourged man now sat by the wall, surrounded by the rest. Ludwig sheathed his sword and approached the wounded. Dead, crumpled by the power of fire and slithered down along the wall. Small trails of smoke yet arose from the deceased. His head had slumped forward, and Ludwig cared little to see the death mask of his companion.
Rest finally, friend. Your search is over.
They were so... Oleg stammered behind him. Ludwig quickly left the side of the burned and faced his yet living friend.
These things happen, all right? We all knew it, and we care for each other as best as we can. But at times, there is only so much we can do. This is not your doing, you hear?
Oleg was shaken, but steeled himself. Their task had yet to be completed. Ludwig gripped the lever and switched it. The walls moaned in a deep echo. Oleg handed him his rifle. He took hold of it while Oleg retained his grip, nodding reassuringly.
Let's be off.
They trekked back through the halls, worryingly listening to any sound that might indicate a wandering aberration passing them by in the path they previously cleared of any miscreants. They finally and without incident came upon the barred gate with hooded statues sentineling its sides, now shining the way for it to be opened. Ludwig's conscience was dragging behind, fueled with their dwindling numbers, especially now.
Hey, Ludwig.
Hmm?
Do you suppose there is a grander purpose to this? It's all so punishing, you know.
I know, but one cannot question faith, lest it be rendered a mere child's fantasy. Without us, the church's work would be impossible.
Yeah, faith. Faithful like the Sumerians.
Ludwig stopped. They had arrived at a large gate, just a few steps beyond the recently opened passage.
To tell you the truth, I am blessed to have this chance. You are too, however toilsome it can feel. But I will not do this forever. I have other callings. But for now it is this place that calls, and I will go where it takes me. It's just about knowing whether the call is righteous or nefarious.
The silence resumed, and he put his hands to the carved wood door and pushed. Barely a slither of the room was enough for him to give a short pause until his decisiveness told him otherwise. As the door opened up fully, Gasps from his accomplices finished the sound of the creaking door. As if sleeping, crouched on all fours, sat a mountain of fur. Ginormous, larger than the giants which until now had held the master title of their size. Breaths, sounding like the wind, rhythmically traveling through the space of the round chamber. It was a mystery in itself how such a grand creature got itself inside. Gremia's hands gripped Ludwig's shoulder. He saw the tomb veteran with a new fear in his eyes. He could not blame him.
Ludwig, I will forever curse your chivalry if it compels you to fight that thing.
He sounded grave and terribly afraid. Ludwig knew where his duty lay and where it may take him. He could only hope and pray that one day his path would call him out of the depths. But if this place was destined to be his grave, so be it. But looking at his companions, his friends, he felt his sense of duty waver, despite it being shared between them.
Very well. We return to the church and let them decide.
Frederica walked straight into the office she had been directed to at the men's lobby. The door was closed, but she had little concern these days for formalities. Inside was a rather spacious room with a little table and armchairs right in front of her, and on the right wall stood a desk, by which a man sat with his feet laid up on its surface. He immediately straightened out once he saw her enter, and was about to protest, but she cut in before he could.
Professor Layton.
Yes?
She stomped up to his desk and threw the documents on the table.
Ihil.
She said, and was about to turn around but was stopped by Layton's quick wits.
Oh, but where is Maiden? I have awaited him for some days now.
She sighed. There was really no bother to enlighten the man.
He's dead.
Layton's bearded jaw fell open, and the small eyes stared back at her in shock. Eventually he collected himself and looked down at the papers in front of him, limply flipping through them until his eyes became fixed.
How?
The sage beat the life out of him. It happened very quickly, and despite the blunt force, he was likely not alive for much of it.
He looked back up.
But this is his report.
I had to finish it. I noted down what the sage said right after he was pulled off his body.
Layton flipped to the last paper.
Was there any reason behind it?
He remained more focused on his reading while asking.
Well, he was mad, sir. Who knows what truly got into his head?
He continued to read, the small eyes growing wider and wider until he, with something akin to horror, turned his head up at her.
Yarnam. Queen Yarnam had a child?
That's what he said.
And a special child, and oh, by a child of Erdon. Did he truly say that?
Mm-hmm. The god himself.
Do you know what this means for our work? He had grown elated, but she shrugged.
I'm just a cleric.
Oh, apologies. But all the same, we will need to verify this information. Second opinions must be gathered, and further divinations of this child. He was silenced when she turned around and walked towards the door. Oh, but wait. I will need to read through all the details so we can create further studies and plan for more research. She stopped at the door, holding the knob.
You'll have to ask someone else, sir. Today is my last day.
Oh, Mr. Wynne. Professor Harald entered the room. He did not look to greet him, but only heard him approach. He remained standing firmly and focused at the bed's end. I do hope there won't be a problem now. Sympathies aside, protocol is protocol. He mumbled a weak protest when Harald came up to stand beside him to look at the patient. His father opened his eyes slightly where he lay and looked back at them. Good morning, sir. How are we feeling today? No lingering aches? He opened his mouth but was not able to form any words, and so retorted to just shaking his head weakly. Pa? The older man shifted his eyes to his son, but they remained unaware and emotionless. You have a visitor. He is quite worried. Oh, yes. He replied in a different tone of voice, one that he was not used to hearing him with. How are you feeling, Pa? He twisted his eyebrows at him annoyingly. Good enough. Wynne looked up at Harald, who moved to his father's side. The look he got in return was one of further sympathy and a slight shaking of the head to accompany it. He turned back to his father. Well, how is your treatment going? You are a doctor? Should you not know? Of course. I... Take care now. He left the room. After closing the door, it felt as if his legs gave out, having been deprived of their very bones, and he stumbled over to a chair that stood against the corridor wall. He could not think of much when he buried his face in his hands. So many thoughts were there that his very mental process seemed to have ceased completely. After a short moment emerged Professor Harald from the door. Well? My apologies. But normal blood transfusion can as of yet do naught for his condition. At least not one so severe. He is old. It is never easy to see them depart like this, but speaking to someone who has experience, it is never easy and there is no good answer to give. But the blood, by now, surely. He stood up with haste. A new treatment. They are developed all the time. There must be something. At least do not let his end be like this. Harald was hesitant and appeared to grow worried as he adjusted his round spectacles. Well, I suppose you would know, but the risk, or rather the chance, it is never certain. He's not that old. His body could take it. I know it. There are a couple of years left until he leaves the preferable age. Besides, I'm his next of kin. I deem it worthy a try if it could give him a couple of extra lucid years. What else is there to do? Nothing? Harald nodded and gave a pacifying smile. Very well, he said calmly, not appearing as compassionate as he had before. There are indeed experimental treatments. You are brave, Wynne. Let us handle it. It is only a question of dosage. Nothing to worry about.
Great Thumeru Yhil chalice. A chalice that breaks a labyrinth seal. Great chalices unlock deeper reaches of the labyrinth. Thumeru Yhil was the title of both the Thumerian monarch and its capital. This reveals that while early Thumerians were mere humble guardians of the slumbering great ones, their descendants felt entitled to name themselves a leader.